More proud of it, that someone from the Commission and someone from the Parliament, we not only on the same stage without falling from it, but we are also in a very, very good cooperation between the Parliament and the Commission. But I wanted to tell you something else. When I grew up, I wondered what this thing was in my grandfather's drawer. It was a leather black cube with a lot of leather belts, and I asked everyone in the family, and nobody could actually tell me. And the only one who could tell me was my grandfather, but he didn't really want to. This was, of course, the tefillin and the little prayer book of my great-grandfather, who was the last one who visited synagogue in our little town in southern Russia, in the southern Soviet Union by then, in Astrakhan. I don't know if anyone knows the city. And he went there every morning, and he prayed, and then he came home, and then he went in the evening, and then he slept, and he went in the morning, and then he went in the evening, and this was the cycle of his life. But at some point, this cycle was interrupted, and at some point I was standing in front of the drawer without that many people who could explain me what this little black cube was in front of me. My Jewishness and the Jewishness of so many of us, maybe some people who are sitting here for many years and for many decades in the Soviet Union, was a black cube. We were actually proud Jews. We knew we were Jews. In fact, we had a stamp in the passport that we were Jews, and we were proud of it. But this was something. This was a feeling, a pride. This was some sort of loyalty, which we could not put in words. We couldn't define it. We always had questions, like me standing in front of the drawer and questioning what this black cube was. The first time when I visited our small synagogue, the same one that my grandfather visited every day, every morning and every evening, was to meet Ada and Menachem. The two names that I would have never imagined I would ever meet in the little southern Astrakhan town. They came, and all the little Jewish community of 3,000 members of Astrakhan suddenly said, "Let's meet in the synagogue. Ada and Menachem are there." I had no idea who Ada and Menachem was, so I followed there. And suddenly we met Ada and Menachem, who could not speak Russian. They only spoke English, and a language that I had hardly heard before. This was Hebrew. And then they opened these books that were colorful, and they opened these books and they opened a whole new world with pictures, colorful and actually magnetizing. Those were booklets from Sachnut about Israel. They brought those books, but they also brought black and white books. They were not very colorful, but they were full of those letters that they pronounced. And this was Hebrew. And this was actually the first time that they put me the ribbons and the black cube, and they told me to repeat after them, and I repeated after them, and when I was finished, they told me I was a man. This was my bar mitzvah. In the middle of that, 3,000 people, they were not there, of course, not all of them, but with the open booklets, colorful booklets about Israel, people speaking to each other, Ada and Menachem, whom I never met in my life, they made me a Jew. In Russian, Israeli sounds like alien. I don't know if that many people speak Russian here, but Израильтяне sounds like iнопланетяне. I grew up with stories on TV about some aliens in the Near East who invaded Palestine and suppressed Palestinians. This was our Soviet TV and the Soviet upbringing. And suddenly, those aliens were just normal Ada and Menachem with colorful books and a leather cube, which they put on my hand. And suddenly, the whole Jewish community came together, and suddenly this feeling, pride, loyalty, this black cube, which we couldn't define, received signifiers, words, and they started to become a story, the Jewish story, where the feeling became a history and a future. Antisemitism has always been part of the story, but it was never the only part of this story. We had not so much religion, but we had family histories, and yes, we had also stories about the Holocaust, for which we also didn't have a name, because in the Soviet Union, where I grew up, the Holocaust was not a term. It happened to every Soviet citizen, they said. And only after that, we realized how that feeling and those memories also have become words and have become a story, a tragic story of our nation and our community. But ever since, I have been struggling how to live a normal life, even though you belong to a community which so many people in the world are obsessed with. How can you live normalcy, be and remain this Jew that you became because Ada and Menachem put something on your forehead, and still take the hate seriously, but also take the Jewishness seriously and maybe lightly, not so heavy because of the hate and the history. And the formula that I usually say to myself, we can only fight anti-Semitism if we live our Jewishness as if there is no anti-Semitism. And we can only live our Jewishness if we fight anti-Semitism as if we were not Jews. And this is the formula that helps me to come back to what we are. Many of us are, because not everyone is Jewish here, of course, but what I am. And I think that this describes the motto, the slogan that should guide us, and at least this is the slogan that guides me in my work. I do not want, even though I was once, I am not a professional Jew. As many of us would be called here. I was a professional Jew, and I was a proud professional Jew. I worked for the American Jewish Committee for a number of years in Berlin. And I respect this path, and I respect this calling, and I respect many of you doing this work, because you are actually at the forefront of this very difficult balance between normalcy and obsession of everyone else with your normalcy. But I think that a couple of points and a couple of principles are important, and one of these principles are alliances. Let's fight anti-Semitism as if we are not Jews, but let's also expect from others to fight anti-Semitism because they are not Jews. And maybe in this room we can say, let's also be grateful that we have such great friends that are not Jewish, but they dedicate their lives to fighting anti-Semitism, even though they are not Jews. So thank you to everyone who is not Jewish in this room and whom we love for what you're doing. And in the parliament, we just had an event yesterday in the parliament with the working group on anti-Semitism. I am a vice president of this group. And I know why I'm a vice president of this group. I wanted the president to be non-Jewish. And we talked about this with many colleagues. And most of the members are not Jewish. So for me, this is the symbol and the symbolism of these alliances. But those alliances do not go only one way. It's not a one-way street. And that's why I know some of you, and I know that you take care that this will not be a one-way street, that we, as a Jewish community, will bring back to our allies what we expect from them. Our solidarity, our loyalty, and our understanding that minorities stick together and fight for each other's rights. And this is the miracle of our life of Jews in the diaspora, but also of all the minorities in the diaspora, which is democratic and which is European. And with that, I'm at another principle which I think is important for our Jewish communities, and unfortunately, in many Jewish communities, you have to make this point separately and undermine it and stress it. I think that the best version of Jewish life can only be in liberal democracies. In liberal democracies where we live, they're not perfect, but they're based on the idea that minorities, that fundamental rights, that rule of law are as sacred as our identifications, as we were said to say yesterday, or identities, as others would say, or our religions. I do not think that democracy is our religion. For that, I'm not religious enough. But I do think that the liberal democracy is a gift and an opportunity for us. I'm a very transatlantic person, and that's why, for me, I think the thriving Jewish life in the United States was only possible because it's one of the best functioning, with all the deficits, one of the best functioning democracies. And I think that the Jewish life in Europe will only be thriving as long as we have a life in a liberal democracy. And this is something that I would have wished to say to the ambassador guest yesterday from Hungary. I would love to say this to our Hungarian, to our Polish friends, to our Bulgarian friends, but also to many others, also in Germany and in many other countries who do have their doubts about the merits of liberal democracies. We Jews know what it means, and we should fight for it. But I think there is one more principle which is also important today, and we see it today during the war, we see it today during the very tough crisis that we are going through, and I think this is also a principle which is very Jewish. It's a principle of resilience. We as a community is a resilient community. Maybe Europe and democracies can also learn something from us. For me, resilience doesn't mean that we push someone and punch someone into the stomach. That we as democracy are capable to be militant democracy. We can be. We know this. The democracy has to be militant. But resilience is something else. Resilience is the ability of an entity to restore itself, to take back the best features that it had before the crisis. And this is what the Jewishness is about. Through all the tragic history, we were able to regenerate ourselves and to bring back the best in our communities. And I think Europe is also something like this and should take example on that. If we are in crisis, let's get back to the best what we have. If we need to defend democracy, let's still stick to the minorities' rights, to the civil rights, to the rule of law. And I'm coming back to this resilience and an ability to regenerate itself, which these societies can learn from us, being part of these societies, and we can learn also from the best examples of these societies. Let's be free and let's be resilient. And the last point that I think is important also to me, especially in my life, is the Europeanness for us, the Jews here in Europe. Why? Because I think that Jews were actually the prototype of European Union. Our communities, and if you read Hannah Arendt, you will see how historically Jews have transcended the borders. This was our function for many rulers. This is why some instrumentalized us, but they instrumentalized something that was very natural for us. Our communities transcended borders in Europe. Brothers and sisters were not only brothers and sisters in Germany or in Prussia or in the United Kingdom. Brothers and sisters were brothers and sisters. Those were Jews and Europeans. And I think this is the model that guided us throughout the centuries. And this is the model of Europe that we're having. And that's why I feel sad when I see some of the representatives of the countries who left the European Union, but are still hoping to become part of us. Hello, Jonathan. And we hope that you will at some point become part of us as well. So this is important for us to understand and to also keep this European spirit that we've been having. These are the couple of principles, and thank you for allowing me to share this with you. A couple of principles who brought me to the European Parliament and to Brussels, who brought me to understanding and putting story on my own self-understanding, and who brought me to Brussels from the little apartment in Astrakhan, where I was puzzled by the little drawer with a black cube in it. Let's celebrate the black cube that becomes a story.